All right, we are live. Welcome to another edition of the O Bro Show. I'm your host for today, Josh of the O Bro Show, joined only by myself. My brother is not here, so it's not much of an O Bro Show. It's just, I guess, just a normal show. But that's all right because I'm not alone. I'm joined by a guest I'm very excited to have on, Cody Lawrence, who is going to be really giving me the deep dive and the insight and his expertise on the woke right, which if you're not, I would say if you have a healthy relationship with the internet and you're not in the deep dive of X, where typically you find these types of folks that creep and crawl around corners of the internet, you might not be familiar about what woke right is. And admittedly, to me, it's a little bit difficult to define as a term. So I wanted to have Cody on to get who I know has spoken a lot on the woke right, has been critical of them as a movement. And so I wanted to ask him some questions, just have a conversation, as it's something from my end that I've seen is a problem that this is associating with, or at least is loosely associated with Christians online. And so I want to see how pervasive this issue is in Cody's opinion and just ask him, have a conversation, basically, is the goal for this. So like any Obro Show episode. But Cody, how are you doing? Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, how you got into making content on YouTube, on X, and then maybe take that to what led you to interacting with the woke right
Of course.
online?
It's a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for the invite, Josh. And this is something, that I've talked about a lot. Probably the first thing I want to preface this with before I even introduce myself is, depending on the audience, a lot of people will just totally discount you for saying woke right because they'll say there's no such thing. But I myself don't really like the term woke right. And so we'll get into that. Hopefully that's so your listeners don't just immediately click off, because it is a weird term, and I want really to break it down and to help people understand exactly what I'm talking about, no matter what you want to call it. It can go by many different names. In fact, the group that we're going to be discussing takes on a new title for themselves like every week, and we can talk about that too. But anyway, so me, I currently am just a layman. I started my podcast called Spare No Arrows. Started my podcast back in 2020 because I noticed a lot of problems in the church, and they are prevalent all the time. So even still, there are problems in the church to be talked about. And at the time, the deconstruction movement was pretty popular. I am a very hardcore conservative. I am very, very right wing. And there were a lot of people criticizing the church from a leftist perspective. And not a lot of people are, there are like conservative commentators and conservative influencers, but not a lot of conservatives, I think, are specifically interested in calling out the theological problems in churches or the societal or the cultural problems and then correcting them biblically. And so that's what I wanted to do. So my podcast is for that, and also just discussing current events and theology and culture and just kind of, whatever I decide to talk about, but within the context of equipping people, equipping Christians specifically, to live more Christ-like in society. And so that's kind of why I started my podcast. Previous to that, I was a youth pastor. I also went through seminary partway until I got engaged and then moved, and I was considering transferring to another seminary. And I didn't have a wonderful experience at the church that I was a youth pastor at. And a lot of this kind of opened my eyes to, this isn't just something happening in my church. This is something happening at a lot of churches. And so I started digging into a lot of the negative stuff that's happening in a lot of denominations and in a lot of churches. And I realized, like, I don't actually want to go back to seminary because I'm not sure that, the seminary near me is actually any good, or I'm not even sure that very many at all seminaries are worth going to and getting an education from, because of the corruption is so prevalent in institutions right now. And I think the same thing applies to churches. And so that's what I am trying to equip people against, to watch out for that kind of thing in their churches and their institutions, with the Christian podcasts they listen to, the media they consume, and to be able to help themselves and their families and their churches build more theologically sound churches and equip their families better, equip their institutions better, make them better. So not just building down, but
Yeah.
to improve things. So that's
Mm.
kind of who I am. And the woke right issue itself, like I said, I don't really like the term
Yeah.
completely, but I think it's a very helpful term, and it's very useful, specifically because all of the people it usually makes mad are exactly the people who you're talking about. So even though I
Right.
think the term is not perfect, because I think just based on the kind of person that it's talking about, just like the word woke
Yeah.
isn't perfect because the word
Mhm.
woke means awake, which is a good thing. Like it's good to be originally in the original definition of the word, like you want to be woke, and then the left kind of commandeered that
Yeah.
word for themselves, and it's like now woke is a bad thing. So no word is completely perfect, but if you're patient to understand what somebody is talking about, I think the woke right is a very useful term, and the woke right knows exactly
Mm.
what it means, and they will say things
Mm.
like, "Oh, it doesn't exist," whatever. But here's my definition. It's so simple. The woke right are woke people who pretend to be right. That's it. They
Mm.
pretend to be right wing. They're woke people at their very core, and we can talk more about this, but
Yeah.
they pretend, they put on this facade of right wing values when really their values completely align with wokeism.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good. And keeping with your background before we get into the woke right, have you seen, because you get into it in 2020, and I feel like analyzing the political moment from 2020 to 2025 is very interesting. Do you feel like there's been a shift where, especially with where your heart's at, making churches better, making families better, um, from a layman's perspective, do you feel like you've had to spend more time criticizing people that purport to be right wing or commandeering right wing movements? Has that been a shift? And if it has, when did you start noticing that shift?
Yeah, for sure. So within my spheres, at least, like the Reformed Christian sphere is kind of the
Yeah.
sphere that I'm in. Wokeness was kind of a problem everywhere. So like most
Mm.
churches didn't even see COVID coming, and most churches weren't prepared for the lockdowns. And I personally am very like anti-vax, whatever. But no matter where the people in your audience are from on that, like
Yeah.
it's not the church's, like the government has no authority over the church. That's true. So even if you like vaccines, the government has no authority to lock down churches or to force church people to wear masks. Like that is an entirely different sphere of government. And if
Mm.
our churches understood the Bible better, we would know, like if a tyrannical government tries to tell us what to do, we actually have a responsibility to resist those things. Even if every single person in your church is vaccinated or wants to wear a mask willingly, your church
Mm.
still, I believe, at that time had the responsibility to say, we're not going to follow this because you tell us to,
Mm.
and resist that evil tyrannical kind of mindset. And so that's kind of where it all started. A lot of churches, way too many, capitulated to the mask mandates, and very early on, I kind of saw that this was a bad thing. And it's like, if I see this as a bad thing, how come pastors don't see this as a bad thing? Like, how come pastors, the people who should be shepherding the flocks, aren't equipped to actually defend their congregations against the most important cultural problems that we are encountering in the whole world right now? And so
Mm.
that kind of thing kind of made me have my eyes open for like what other big cultural things are coming down the pipeline that we need to be prepared for. And I wouldn't really say that there was a shift. I think there was kind of a development for like why things have gone the direction that they did that we can discuss. But
Yeah.
to me, it's like it really is the same issue that not only has been happening since 2020, but since like the beginning of time, where people like pastors don't understand how to shepherd their flocks well. Adam
Mm.
didn't understand how to shepherd his family well. It's exactly the same problem. And it's because people, like churches, are prioritizing the love of themselves, or the love of comfort, or the love of avoiding controversy over the love of the word of God.
Mm. And do you think, and I'm interested to hear from your perspective, going to seminary and then not deciding to continue in that direction. Do you think part of the problem pastorally is biblical application? I know. I feel like I just saw a video. I don't know if you've heard of him, but Bob the Baptist just did a video,
Oh yeah,
which is he's getting into this topic. Yeah, we're really excited. We're gonna have him on the show too.
nice.
But he just did this video talking about expositional preaching and
Mhm.
how we've gotten so focused on verse by verse telling you what the Bible says that we've forgotten the element of applying it to our lives, applying it to this day and age. And to what you're talking about, what I'm hearing and what I'm wondering if you could respond to this too. Do you think some of the issue is not the church taking a step back from being culturally relevant? And I think that's actually a tension that I feel too, because I don't want to go too far where the church is, overtly political or topical in every essence that they could be. But I see the tension there in the balance, and it's getting me to reinvestigate. Do you think that that's a potential problem there with their unresponsiveness to woke trends?
Yeah, I like most people, most at least evangelical Christians in America have been around a lot of big Eva churches. A
Hmm.
good chunk of my life was spent in big Eva churches, and one of the characteristic values I think of big Eva churches is being as ironically, those are the churches who say the most like we want to be engaged in the culture, and we want to be engaged in they call it the community. But
Right.
usually
Yeah.
what that means is outreach, and we're just going to share the gospel with you, whatever. But ironically, those are the churches who actually want to be as hands off on politics as possible, or at least that's what they say. Because in
Hmm.
reality, a church, like, you support something, like whatever ideology your church actually supports, that's what you support. So if the culture is actively pushing abortion, and if that's the direction the culture is going, for example, and no Christian should be for abortion, and your church
Right.
is refusing to say anything about that and to teach like, let's say, and a lot of big Eva churches are like this. Let's say your congregation is very politically diverse. I've been to churches that were full of leftists and right-wing people, like a total mix, and nobody even talked about that kind of stuff. It's like, what
Hmm.
how is it possible that Christians
Yeah.
would be afraid to talk about murder? Like, so
Hmm.
those churches have chosen a side, right? So even if they say behind the curtains, oh yeah, we're conservative, we don't like abortion, it's not good, but also we want to be able to share the gospel with as many people as possible. And so we wouldn't want to offend them with something like, I don't know, the gospel, right? So the point
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
the application of scripture is absolutely necessary to scripture. And the
Hmm.
Bible even says this itself, because there are people who can recite the gospel. Like
Yeah.
Satan in James, it says, demons know the gospel, but
Hmm.
they don't respond in the way that they should. In the same way, there are going to be people who say that they lived their life for Jesus, and Jesus is going to say he never knew them. And I think the
Hmm.
difference is, it's just professing something is not enough. Saying you're a conservative evangelical church is not enough. Just saying like, oh yeah, we're against abortion, but then living completely the opposite way, it actually shows where your heart is, and where your heart is what matters. And so I think it's ultimately it's a cowardice, and I think a lot of these things stem from in churches, like the abortion issue in particular, is
Yeah.
and then a lot of you could say the same thing about homosexuality and any kind of controversial cultural issue, is because churches want to appease as many people as possible in order, and what they say is in order to bring them the gospel. But
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if the gospel that those churches are delivering to people applies to everything except for abortion, or applies to everything except for homosexuality, or really it doesn't apply to a lot of things, that's not actually the
Hmm.
gospel at all, because the gospel of the Bible applies to every single part of your life.
Hmm. Yeah. That's really good. Um, so taking us back to the woke, give me your definite, what is wokeness, and then we'll see how it applies to the people that don't like the title the woke, right? But what is woke, and how do you how do you figure out who's woke or not?
Right. Yeah, this is something that I think a lot of people have used that language on both sides, like left versus right, woke versus conservative, whatever. And
Yeah.
we don't really think about the meaning of those words. But
Hmm.
it seems like now, at least, the word woke is inextricably Marxist. So, like, woke equals Marxism. That's what I would say. And
Mm.
so it's also important to understand the distinction between left versus right. It also, like,
Right.
historically speaking, the left wasn't always as Marxist as they are now. But I think, like, the vast majority of leftists are woke, and all woke people are Marxist, is what I would say. And so
Mm.
Marxism is this ideology that wants to split people up into different class categories. It could be class, it could be race, it could be, yeah, working class versus elites. It could be, high earning people versus low. It could be black versus white, whatever. So
Yeah.
these different classes are created specifically for the purpose of labeling a certain group as the oppressor in order to destroy that group of people. So the Marxists are usually or at least they consider themselves the lower class people, the oppressed, and then
Mm.
they use this ideology to oppress their oppressors, essentially. and and that is
Mm.
what wokeness is. We saw it in 2020 with splitting people up into the pro-vaccine versus the anti-vaccine, or the pro-abortion versus anti. It's like you create these very strict class categories of people in order to oppress them. And it's not just ideas, because it's okay to point out ideas and call those ideas evil, but
Yeah.
it happened a lot. Like, for example, BLM is a just incredibly Marxist organization, because its goal was to basically label white people as evil. And
Hmm.
the LGBT movement, its goal was to label also white people as evil, but like straight white people, specifically straight white males, as evil. And
Hmm.
so a lot of this woke movement was specifically crafted by Satan himself to label um, straight white males as this oppressed class in order to destroy them. And in a lot of ways, it worked, because I think that's where the woke right movement came from. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Mm. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
also important to understand the difference between left and right. So not only is left this like tied to Marxism, but the left versus the right, and this is very important in the woke right discussion, is the left values big government over small government. The left values the value of the group over the value of the individual. The left values
Mm.
tyranny over self-governance, which is a value of the right. The left values socialism over capitalism, and the left values Marxism over equal human rights and value. And so whenever we look at this new movement that's happening, I would argue that the values of the, woke right, and the reason I don't like the word woke right is because they're not actually
Yeah.
right wing. That's why I don't like it.
Hmm.
They are woke, but they're not right wing. That's why it's an imperfect phrase. But I think it
Mm.
does a good job
Mm.
at pointing out the people who they're pretending to be right wing, but they
Yeah.
are very much woke.
Mm. Do you think? Yeah. It's. Trying to think of. Well, I will say this because I have thought this, and I want to get your thoughts on this too.
Yeah.
Part of my frustration, why I think woke, even when it was helpful, that some of my frustration with the word woke is that it seemed like just the next iteration of the same category of people that conservatives are using as a new label to hammer left-wing people, as
Mm,
as a club, and
sure.
not necessarily always wrongly, sometimes deservedly so.
Yeah.
But in my lifetime, it was the SJWs, the social justice warriors. No one uses that term anymore. That's like gone. It's in the ether.
Sure.
And then it was like for a couple years there, it was CRT. Like everything was CRT, and that
Yeah.
was like it had to be that. And if it was, then you kind of knew what they were talking about.
Hmm.
Oh, and in between there was identity politics. That got used kind of interchangeably. And now it's
Yeah.
woke. And woke is actually surprisingly so had a lot more staying power with being like, that's woke. We don't like that. But I do see, because your definition is far more precise and helpful in defining the dangerous iterations. I guess where I'm getting at is the frustration of saying there's a tendency to just say something I don't like is woke. So you point to like a
Yeah.
Disney Channel movie that might suck for various reasons, and you just say this is woke, and then it doesn't help us get to the actual definition of things and actually be able to point it out when you see it in our communities, in our churches. Is that frustration something that you resonate with, that you see as a I don't know. I just feel like sometimes these labels are so silly. I don't know.
Yeah,
Seems like
some
putting
one
people
thing
into
the
teams.
woke right people do is they like to use the same exact labels against people like me, where they say, "Oh, look at this
Mm,
guy, he's woke because he doesn't like right-wing values." And I'm like, I I love right-wing values. You don't like right-wing values. And so you're
mm,
the woke one here. And so in that kind of situation, it can just go around in circles. And so that's why
yeah.
I always prefer to talk about the ideas behind these things and the pieces that make up the full puzzle. So it's not just like wokeness is bad. Like you can watch a movie that's woke and it will be bad because
Right.
it's woke. But
Yeah.
that's also why we have to understand what wokeness is. So we're not just labeling things woke willy-nilly. And this happens all the time. Like people will just throw out labels that they know the culture doesn't like, or at least the people in their group that they're trying to manipulate don't like.
Mm,
And so they'll say, "Oh, look at that guy. He's XYZ, he's gay, or he's, that's a straw man argument." Straw man is another thing that people love to throw around and they have
right.
no idea
Yeah.
what it means.
Yeah.
But yeah, this kind of thing happens all the time. But that's why it's important to, one, I think, really understand what your opponents believe and to be able to articulate their positions properly. And what I see on the internet all the time is like nobody on their side is actually articulating my position properly. Where
Mm,
what was it like there was the Candace Owens interview with Tucker Carlson where she's like, Seth Dillon hates, like he laughs when Palestinian kids die or something like that. It's like that is a blatant lie. And if you
yeah.
call yourself a Christian, like lying is actually wrong, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if a person can't
Mm-hmm.
even articulate their opponent's position, now you might not completely understand your opponent's position or all the nuance of your opponent's position. Like when I'm talking about the broad ideology of the woke right, that doesn't mean that the thousands of woke right people out there think exactly the same. That's not what that means. But what I'm trying to do is craft the things that I see as similarities between this broad worldview that has this connection where like these people broadly do really actually want big government, and I don't want that. And big government
Mm,
is not a right-wing value. See, so
mm,
that's the kind
mm,
of thing that I'm trying to do.
mm. So take me through what do you think, what was the rise of the woke right? I know that label is not helpful. What was the rise of these uh left-wing identitarian fascistic people that don't like Jews? That seems to be like the overarching connection. But what was the rise? I know that what I maybe I just gave the ball away, but I think that that's a big part of it. What do you think was the rise of
Yeah, it
this
is.
kind
So
of
I think
separate group?
right. Yeah, we could go back a lot farther than this, but if we go
Yeah.
back to 2020 or even just the past decade or even 2 decades, the left, we can the term woke is relatively new, so we can just talk about the left. The left has developed this strategy of wanting to destroy uh, normal, specifically white people, or
Mm-hmm.
like the
Mm-hmm.
dominant class, if you want to call them that, in America, which
Yeah.
happens to be white people. And also they want they want to destroy things like traditional family values. And so they want to target like, oh, if you're straight, you're a bad guy. You're not, you're weird, you're abnormal if you're straight. And so that's where the phrase like cis white male came from. You're like the
Mm-hmm.
most evil person in the world if you're a cis white male. And so after being beat down with this kind of propaganda for years, like a lot of younger people, and younger people are the ones who are specifically, I think, vulnerable to this for this reason, because a lot of them are public schooled. And in public school, you get the worst of this propaganda where you're basically told you
Mm,
have no value. You like any kind of privilege you have needs to be like you need to be squashed because of your privilege. All the good things about you are actually bad things about you. All the good things that your ancestors did or our society did is actually bad because there are other people who didn't have those same values. And so because of all of this propaganda, I think a lot of white people, a lot of straight, like normal white people with, like normal, rational, basic values were really beat down by this. And that made a lot of people really angry. And instead of resisting the worldview that said that, instead of saying, okay, I'm not going to fit into this worldview, there must be some kind of better option. And I would argue the better option is the biblical worldview. But instead of resisting the whole worldview, I think what happened is that the majority of these people who have eventually fallen into the woke right category, they have completely followed along with that and said, okay, let's have oppressed and oppressors. And this time I see you as the oppressors because you're oppressing me. And so I'm just going to flip the script on you. I'm going to be a Marxist just like you, except I'm going to crush you this time. So they're following exactly the same script, which is why I think the term woke right is so accurate, because they pretend they have a facade of the values of the woke right, because they're like patriotism, tradition, whatever. Except if you really look at these things, their patriotism isn't patriotic because many of them want to destroy the Constitution. Their family values aren't actual family values because a lot of them actually want to oppress women and relegate them to positions that the Bible does not actually limit women to at all. And so on. So they're doing these things in the name of right-wing values when really they have exactly the same worldview as the leftists who oppressed them for years.
Yeah. I mean, it's Luke, I'll say, go back in this video. We're getting into this topic, but again, Cody's getting into this entire thing. Yeah.
Because you're right, Luke, the right wing cannot be woke. They can't. There's no such thing. That's why the woke right term, I think, is valuable, because there is no such thing as woke people who are right. They are woke people to their core who call themselves right, but really they're not. They're just woke.
Now, a lot of it's even down to they don't want to conserve really anything other than their ethnic identities. They're really looking for social reform, and oftentimes dramatic social reform. Like let's turn the United States into our own quasi-Nazi Germany, and that's pretty extreme, I would think, for a conservative.
And many of them are even abandoning the label of conservative, because they're like, conservatives don't conserve anything, yada yada. But it's like, true. Well, I would agree. I would actually agree that the majority of conservative politicians aren't actually conservative, but that doesn't mean conservatism is bad. True conservatism is good. That's exactly like the deconstructionists that say, well, there are bad Christians out there, therefore Christianity's bad. It's all the same kind of argument.
Yeah. Another friend of the stream, PF Ewing, says, I don't think churches are compromised by woke right because Douglas Murray and James Lindsay aren't going to church. He's big. He's another YouTuber. I don't know if you know him, but he thinks that Douglas Murray and James Lindsay are actually the woke right because they categorize people like a Dave Smith in a such a way that he doesn't like. Bad description, but you'd have to talk to him.
I don't understand his argument, so maybe he can write something that makes more sense. I don't know.
Because I do think I think it great, and it is helpful for the audience, and it's helpful for me to talk about figures, not in a sense to just call them out, but it is helpful to so we have a dartboard that we're aiming at, and I think for me the figurehead of what a woke right person is that is also infiltrating churches is Corey Mahler. And I don't see a better example than that. Am I accurate in saying that, Cody?
Yeah, I think he's one of the top figures that a lot of these other people are inspired by. He has a tremendous following that overlaps with a lot of these other guys following. And he follows leftist, like you mentioned, kind of the phrases identity politics and social justice are kind of dead now. But I think those are actually valuable ideas, and critical race theory. Those are valuable ideas for us to understand, because Corey Mahler is all about identity politics, which is a leftist thing. He wants to base everything in the world off of if you're white versus if you're black, which is critical race theory. Like, we need to understand the world through this lens of race. And in his case, he says racism can't exist against black people, but That's exactly what BLM taught. They were like, well, black people can't be racist. It's only everybody else can be racist towards me. So it's okay if I hate you, but it's bad if you hate me. So, and then social justice, where it's like, we have to enact this social change in order to bring about this evil, Marxist utopia that I'm imagining. So yeah, Cory Mahler is woke right to a T.
And what is Cory Mahler's influence on the church? Because I think that's my big issue. Is I'm seeing people on X that have crusaders as their AI generated profile picture. They're Christians in the bio, and then they're saying the most horrendous things to people on the internet, oftentimes anonymous. But it does seem like they're attaching themselves to parts of Christianity that it seems like that's a growing trend in my mind. I don't know if you agree, Cody.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I think the reason that this is because Satan loves to corrupt good things. And so bad people want to, and again, this is Marxism, like this is straight out of Rules for Radicals, the famous leftist book, where you want to infiltrate institutions and corrupt them from the inside. And so you want to, like, leftists want to infiltrate conservative institutions. They want to infiltrate schools. They want to infiltrate universities and churches and turn those churches left. Like, we see a lot of organizations that are funded by really big, bad leftist institutions who are funding, like, guess what? Really huge Bible studies that they send to mega churches. Like, it's insane. And so these things really are real, and they really are happening. And so in the same way, that's, I think, what people like Cory Mahler do, where they want their podcasts, or even people like, there's William Wolf, who's a big woke right figure. He's in politics, and he's trying to influence. Like, he was in the White House, and so a lot of these people, they want very secretly to infiltrate institutions. You'll see them deleting a bunch of tweets that are a little too obvious. They're very secretive. They're very opaque with the stuff they really believe. If you ask them, like, there was I did a video on this. There was the popular Jubilee debate that happened recently with the 20 fascists versus the one progressive. And another thing is, like, I hate progressivism. I'm not a progressive at all.
Yeah.
And one thing that made me upset about that debate was they called them far right. Like, no, I'm far right. These people are actually farther left than the progressive. Like, these people are far more progressive in their ideology than the actual professing progressive in the group. But this the really famous clip that was going around of the annoying kid who kept saying quite frankly or whatever, he literally admitted that he didn't even want to answer the guy's question. He just wanted to use this debate as a means to an end to get his ideology out to millions of people. He literally admitted to that. And so I think that debate was awesome for that purpose, because you actually got to see what these people really believe. But that is the kind of thing that is infiltrating churches and other conservative institutions. And it's sneaky, and it's like, there are a lot of different reasons why it's bad, and we can go into kind of that kind of thing. But it's like Cory Mahler wants his podcasts to reach vulnerable, impressionable young men who are victimized, and he wants them to feel afraid and angry, which is a very common leftist tactic. You're easy to control if you're angry, and if they turn you against the institutions that you're in, so that they can use you as puppets to corrupt those institutions that you're in.
What do you think is the best methods to combat this? I mean, I know we're having this discussion, and part of me, it's probably just for how I'm wired. I'm like, we need to get guys like you, Cody, and like publicize debates with these people just to expose them for their oftentimes bad ideas. But it can't be. Oftentimes what I see is that it's a Cory Mahler versus another left-wing, like, nut job. So actually Cory Mahler actually looks reasonable to, like you were saying, the impressionable young man who's looking for an answer to leftism in America. And it's hard to be the quote unquote centrist position there, where you're not even really centrist, but you're representing something in the middle. And sometimes I feel like young men who are looking for something, they're looking for the extremes. And so how do you best address that online? Do you come with the full hammer, the full guns loaded for these people online? Do you have to be more sensitive, thinking that, this anonymous account, this could be a kid that's 16 years old, hasn't even graduated high school yet? I'm trying to think through the best way to, is it the machismo approach where we beat these guys in the marketplace and we strong arm them with better conservative ideas that you and I would agree with? Or is it the softer, you actually got to, I don't even know. I hope that was a cogent question.
I totally get it. Yeah. I think ultimately the very first thing we have to do is understand these things for ourselves. And like, especially if we have platforms, but even if we don't have platforms, every individual person has a responsibility to understand the evils of the culture and protect themselves from those evils. So first, if we can kind of start with that foundation, then that's a good starting point. And then we need to be guarding our families, and we need to be guarding our churches from these things. And our churches, just like back in 2020 with the woke left, pastors have a responsibility to preach against the actual sins that are likely to corrupt their congregation. And so if pastor, just like in 2020, if pastors were not talking about the evils of tyrannical governments, at least a little bit, or if a pastor never talks about the evil of abortion or homosexuality or, anything else, and they say something like, oh, we don't want to get political. It's like, Christianity's political. Sorry. You have to get political. To be a pastor, you have to get political. Now, that doesn't mean you only do topical sermons. Like, pastors also have a responsibility to exposit the text, like your conversation that's coming up is going to be. So I think, I've actually been to churches of both kinds. I've been to churches where they just focus on, like Big Eva churches, where they focus on topical sermons, and they don't. They're like, oh, we don't want to get political. We don't want to be offensive. We just want to kind of talk to, whatever we think the people are going to feel like hearing this week. But then also I was like, after experiencing that church, I was like, oh, well, I need expository sermons. And so I found a church that just preached through the Bible, and it was awesome. But later I started noticing they don't actually have any application. And that was leading to, ironically, exactly the same problems in that church as was in the previous church. They were both very politically diverse churches. They both totally avoided talking about political issues or controversial issues. And so one massive solution is not to actually focus on dealing with the anonymous weirdos online, because you're probably not going to convince them anyway. It's to arm your family against this stuff first and foremost, and then make sure your pastor is talking about this. If your pastor doesn't know that these things are an issue, try to educate him about these things. Or if he refuses, then find a new church. I mean, because this is, anybody with eyeballs in their head should see that this stuff is an issue right now. And that's literally what a pastor's job is, to be able to protect his flock from wolves. And so then after that, I think for those of us with platforms, especially those of us who have platforms where we want to talk about these kind of issues, we should be talking about them in a reasonable and well-evidenced way, so that we can combat these things in whatever capacity we can.
On the church point, I'm again getting in the, and maybe this is because I am a young man, but I'm getting into the seat of a younger man than me.
Sure.
Do you think that, what is the danger in a pastor who is like, I'm trying to think of the woke right young man. So if my pastor is being political in a good way, in a way that we would agree with, and saying that he's addressing sermons in ways that are relevant and cultural, and he's addressing the left, right? He's criticizing them for where they are anti-biblical and anti-Christ. I could see a woke right young man who's anonymous online, is in those circles, but goes to those types of sermons and then is emboldened online because he says, well, my pastor, he's addressing all the same things I'm doing. I'm just doing it, a little bit harder, or I'm focusing on that all the time. On the inverse, if you have a pastor that is informed about the woke right issue and starts addressing that, then you might have a woke right individual who leaves and says, well, that was just a woke pastor. That pastor doesn't understand that they're just addressing the right-wing problems.
Yeah.
So what is the best approach for the pastor? How do you have a balanced approach to these woke right individuals that are in your pews?
Yeah. So one really common attribute of left-leaning churches is seeker sensitivity, caring more about what the congregation or what you think the congregation thinks than what the Word of God says. And so we have to make sure that our churches are not seeker sensitive. We don't want to be seeker sensitive to the left, but we also don't want to be seeker sensitive towards the leftists who call themselves right wing. So if a pastor offends somebody in the congregation, actually their job is to offend every single person in the congregation as often as humanly possible. Because if our sins are not being called out by our pastors, then we can't grow as a congregation. We can't fix our sins. And so you have to have your sins being called out. And what's ironic, here's an irony. This actually does happen. What you said, people do actually leave churches. I have met myself numerous like woke right people around who go to supposedly good churches, and most of them, or actual good churches. And then most of them in those boats, they're really uncomfortable in their churches. And I think that's a good thing, because you want those people to be uncomfortable in your churches. But when something like that happens in your church, like you want to make sure that your pastor is actually speaking to the sins of the congregation and not being seeker sensitive on either side. I can't even say on either side of the political spectrum, because they're both leftists, right? They're both identity politics obsessed like people. But, at the same time, we want to, if somebody, like if one of those people really are around, you can't just strong arm those people or kick them out of your church. Like, you should really be willing to have a conversation with these people. The leftists, one thing the leftists do, and actually it's the same with the woke right. There's like almost everything. There is a connection between the two.
Yeah. Some overlap there. Yeah.
Something that the left does, if they brand you a Nazi, we can't talk to you. Like, you're exiled, we will have nothing to do with Nazis. But if you're on the woke right and you say, oh, you shared a James Lindsay post one time, or, oh, you said something nice about the Jews, it's exactly the same response. It's like, oh, you're garbage. Your opinion's garbage. We're not going to associate with you. And so we can't be that way. If somebody actually legitimately thinks Hitler is a cool guy, they are deeply lost, and there is something seriously, deeply wrong with them. However, we should be willing to have a conversation and correct these people. And then if they refuse to be corrected and they're members of your church, then it might be worth actually taking them through church discipline if they, are entrenched in this like hatred, because hatred is a sin. And then another thing that they like to do is say, well, understanding history differently isn't a sin. And so you're a tyrant if you want to discipline me for like having different opinions on history books than you. It's like, this isn't about history books. This is about hatred, and hatred is a sin. And so like, you can't fall for their propaganda. A good pastor will actually be able to see into the hearts and intentions of a lot of people. And some people really are just stupid, and some people really are just misled. But if their heart really is in the right place, they will change their mind if they're confronted with actual facts and truth. But it's the people who aren't that, if they leave your church, good, because you don't want that corruption in your church. Snakes, you want to get snakes out of the garden. You don't want to snuggle up with snakes and baby them.
That's a good word. So let's do a little, do a friendly role play, right? Let's say I'm the Stone Choir. I'm the Stone Choir young lad, and you're pulling me aside. Yeah, you've encountered many. You're pulling me aside, and I'm convinced the post World War consensus is all a lie. They're I don't even know. We need a Christian prince. I know that's a la Stephen Wolfe. That's the big thing. We need to reform the government. What would your steps be to bring me into biblical truth? Walk me through that.
Yeah. So probably I know that at least they think they really hate leftism. And so my steps would be, I would ask them, like, do you hate Marxism? Usually my conversations with these people don't get this far because they get angry and they stop talking to me, because what it seems like is the vast majority of these people are actually incapable, just like the purple-haired social justice warrior leftists. They're actually incapable of having conversations with people, and they just want to be fed more propaganda that they're used to. So very few conversations actually get this far. But I would just ask them questions, and I would try to find this common ground with them. Like, do you hate leftism? Yes. Do you hate Marxism? Yes. Ironically, some of them are like, actually, Karl Marx had some really great ideas. So
right.
depending on where they're coming from, I would try to be like, okay, do you hate this? And they would say yes, hopefully. And then I would say, okay, I would try to ask them more questions and then walk them through to try to take them to show them, you actually are this thing that you hate. So here's a good question. Is it wrong to hate white people? Yes. Why? And some of them might actually say, well, because white people, like Corey Mahler would probably say something like, well, God has blessed white people and it's okay to hate our enemies. And God has cursed these minorities in various different ways. And so it's actually okay to hate them, and it's wrong for them to hate us, but it's okay for us to hate them. And so, depending on how the conversation goes, it's like, okay, let's go to the Bible and see what the Bible says about that. There are a tremendous number of verses that, like, there are verses that leftists hate to talk about. If you bring up the homosexuality passages, they'll cover their ears and they'll gnash their teeth. And the woke right will do exactly the same thing with the massive number of verses about loving strangers. They'll love all the verses about, like, oh, you have to love your brother, and you have to, it's like love your neighbor. And, who cares about those people halfway across the world? But it's like, those people are strangers. And there is I even preached a sermon a few months ago about hospitality, which means the love of strangers. And so, like, a tremendous biblical case can be made for loving strangers. And so I would try to point out the inconsistent always. Like, one of my favorite things is to point out hypocrisy within somebody's own worldview. And so that's always my approach, because it's very hard to argue with somebody just by sharing facts back and forth. And so I am not interested in actually sharing people all of the evidence that there is for World War II and the Holocaust and the fact that Hitler was a bad guy, whatever, because it's a lot easier, because they have their own stupid evidence, right? Where it's like, I believe every piece of evidence in the entire world points to the creator of a universe. But if I point to all that evidence to an atheist, the atheist still isn't going to care. And so what I need to do first to the person with an untrue worldview is tear theirs down, then replace it with the truth, instead of just sharing facts back and forth.
Yeah, that's helpful. I'm going to throw another. We talked about infiltration and how these woke ideology really infiltrates. It kind of festers. It's like a snake and gets into churches, gets into your families. So let's hypothesize, if we wanted to go on offense, maybe if we're not always on defense. Let's say Cody Lawrence or me, we got into one of the Discord servers. We got into Stone Choir's Discord server, and we were slow, but we started arguing enough that we were infiltrating. Is that a valid strategy, or is that you should probably stay away because their ideas are so horrid? Is there any merit to that?
No, I think it's hard for me to imagine that, because I don't think it works that way, because I really truly believe if you go into the belly of the beast, these people fundamentally are not interested in opposing worldviews. They will just share their memes, and they'll dox you, and they'll kick you out and ban you, whatever. So you mentioned having debates with these people or whatever. Like Stephen Wolf has asked me twice to debate him, like back to back on the same day, or like 2 days in a row or something, after a clip was shared of me criticizing Stephen Wolf for his stupid ideology. And he was like, debate me. And I was like, okay, let's debate. Here's my email address. And guess what he did? Absolutely nothing. He didn't respond. He ghosted. And so this is a common tactic that we know that Stephen Wolf does, where he asks people to debate so that he can go tell his buddies, like, look at, none of these people want to debate me. I'm so cool. Look at, they're scared of me. But really, he's the scared one. And so that they want to put on this facade that they're so cool. So I'm not even convinced that like infiltrating their groups would even be effective. But like if, I share content on X and on Instagram and my YouTube channel. And so we can share content that can reach these people in some ways. But usually it's not even those people who I'm trying to convince. It's because I think rational argument is not actually what they care about. They, and I truly believe this, they are fueled by emotion, and they're fueled by fear and anger. And that just isn't a game that I want to play. I want to play a game of truth. And so typically the people who I find are convinced by my argumentation are the people who are sitting on the fence. There was one guy, but it happens sometimes. So there was one guy who, he was in one of these Discord groups, Joel Webbon's group or something. And people were sharing.
That's another figure that I'm happy you mentioned now. Yeah.
So they were sharing my videos around because that's what they do. So really, I am infiltrating their groups because they hate what I'm saying so much. They will share my stuff around and be like, hey, look at this idiot. He sucks. And some people evidently are convinced. So this one guy, he said, I mentioned this I read this on one of my videos because it was so meaningful to me, but it was last winter. And he said he had some kind of like snow shoveling job, and he had to wake up really early in the morning, and he wanted to stay awake. And so he decided to listen to my podcast because he knew it would make him angry because I'm such an idiot, and it would keep him awake. And the more he listened, the more he started realizing, wow, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Joel Webbon really is one of these people, and I'm on the bad guys team. And he changed his mind, and he stopped associating with that crowd. So I think it is possible, but we can't play their games. That's a super important thing that I absolutely want to emphasize. We can't, like, their tools, their anger and their hatred and their like stupid memes and their constant insults are evil tools. And we as Christians cannot fight with evil tools. We have to realize that our weapons are mighty, and God is ultimately the person that's going to change people's minds, not how hard we can own the libs or whatever. And so all we have to be concerned with is sharing truth and being reasonable, and pray that God is going to make the most reasonable side win.
Yeah, that's good. I want to get into the Jewish question, which I feel like undergirds this whole movement a little bit, at least in some regard. It seems like it's a big
class of people that these Marxists have chosen to pick as the oppressing class. Absolutely.
So how do we even go about that? Because I agree with you. I'm coming from a more reformed background, right? Covenant theology, that type of thing. And I feel like sometimes you say those things and the worst people co-opt your theological talking points to use it in terrible ways. Sure. So how do you, well, maybe I'll get to that question. Why do you think this view, the Jewish question, is pervasive in Reformed circles specifically? Why are they at risk, it seems like, the most to that?
That's a good question. First, I want to clarify something that I said previously, because that made me think of this. You mentioned going on the offensive. I don't want to give the impression that I'm just like hands off and I'm like, just like be reasonable and, share YouTube videos every now and then and don't just stay on the defensive. That's not what I'm saying at all, actually. Like we like good actual Christians need to be politically active. We need to be out there on the offensive constantly. And that's what I'm doing. And that's what I think more Christians need to be doing. It's what our churches should be doing. Like pastors actively speaking out against this evil stuff is going on the offensive against these things. And so I am full on going on the offensive. I just think the way we go about going on the offensive has to look very differently than their version of going on the offensive, because it's completely evil. But to answer your other question, about where this Jewish thing comes from, first, I think dispensationalism is a very common theology in America. And I've made a number of videos a long time ago about dispensationalism and criticizing it. I'm not a dispensationalist. I hate dispensationalism. I even made a video recently, again, criticizing dispensationalism. And I wanted to make clear in the video, like, I don't think dispensationalists are heretics. I think they're wrong. I think dispensationalism is very dangerous. But something that I see a lot of dispensationalists do is saying, like, if you're not a dispensationalist, you're a heretic. And that is like that kind of divisiveness isn't helpful. And so to say, like, they can be very wrong about the relationship of the church and Israel, but they're not heretics. And so first we need to recognize that. But because I think dispensationalism is so pervasive and it's had such a negative influence on America for so many years, I think and Reformed theology, I think, is very strong, and it for a very long time has been critical. It probably the primary source in America that's been critical of dispensationalist theology over its lifetime in America. And so that's probably where some of the inspiration between the arguing about the Jews came from, but also because of what I said earlier, that the Jews just happen to be a very convenient, oppressive class that the Marxists can try to pick to blame all their problems on. So it's like, I don't need to take personal responsibility for my actions or picking myself up by the bootstraps or helping myself to succeed, because the Jews are oppressing me. And so the real solution to the world is to hate the Jews and to destroy them. And that will lead me to have a better life. Just like the BLM was like, let's destroy black people. Let's destroy white people so that black people can have more opportunities. But that's not how that works at all. That just makes the world a worse place.
And so how, I guess broadly, maybe getting out of the theological terms, what should be the church's relationship with Israel? How should we think of that broadly?
Yeah, so because I'm not a dispensationalist, I'm a covenant theology reformed evangelical Christian. I think that there are two groups in the world that we should be concerned with: people who are sons of God and people who are not. And another kind of thing that complicates this issue quite a bit is that Jew can refer to many different things. A Jew can be a nation, or it could be a people, or it could be a religion. And so one thing when I'm having conversations with people about this, I like to very specifically clarify what exactly we're talking about. Because I've had conversations with people before where they're like, the Jews are infiltrating Hollywood. And I was like, okay, are we talking about the people or the religion? And they're like, well, the religion, of course, because you can't say people because you don't want to appear actually racist. And so you have to say, well, as a Christian, I don't hate people groups. I hate the religion. And so the religious Jews are infiltrating Hollywood. And so then I just asked the question, how many religious Jews are actually in Hollywood? How many religious Jews are running the banks? How many and it's like, the answer is almost none. They are ethnic Jews, but they're not religious Jews. And so it's like, the problem therefore is not actually that they hate the religious aspect of it. They hate the ethnic aspect of it, which is silly and completely anti-biblical. And it's not even true. Like, yeah, sure, you could say they're overrepresented, but it's like, okay, black people are overrepresented in the NBA. Is there some kind of like conspiracy happening? Or is it just that this certain people group happens to have certain kinds of skills and values that are useful in certain kinds of situations? And then the irony is they're perfectly okay with saying that about white people, where it's like, oh, white people have become the, whatever, because we're so great and because European ancestry and because we've yada, yada done this for the past 1,000 years. But they hate it when you say that about Jews. Yeah, I think it's a mix of those things. And it's really important to create this distinction when you're talking to these people about, like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the nation? Are we talking about the people? Or are we talking about the religion? So according to Christianity, all other religions are false. And I believe that, and it's obvious according to the Bible, that the Old Testament leads into the New Testament. And so any religion, even Judaism, that claims to follow the Old Testament while rejecting the New Testament doesn't even follow the Old Testament. So
Hmm.
Jews had to become Christians. And if a Jew did not become a Christian, then they weren't even a Jew in the first place, because they weren't, like, Judaism looked for the Messiah, and we have the Messiah. And so those Jews had to become Christians. And if they weren't, then they were looking for a fake Messiah. And so Christianity, to the Jewish religion, I think we have to realize that it is completely false. It's a pagan religion, and they need to be called to salvation. Ethnic Jews, we shouldn't care. We shouldn't care at all if somebody's an ethnic Jew or not. Just like we shouldn't care if somebody's black or white or Asian, or, has one arm or half an eye, or, whatever. Who cares how somebody looks? And then how we approach the nation, I think there's a lot of leeway for how Christians can approach, is the physical location of the nation of Israel what Revelation is talking about, or is that like a metaphorical thing? I think there's some big theological leeway there, where there are very reasonable orthodox arguments on both sides. And so we should be willing to give people grace on those things. However, I think what is not okay is to say, oh, well, the nation of Israel is in the Bible, therefore we need to protect the government no matter what awful decisions they make. So that's not something that we should be doing.
The Ted Cruz Sunday school answer: bless Israel, and we'll bless Israel because then you'll be blessed, and don't curse it because then you'll get cursed. I agree.
I'm not a Tucker Carlson fan, but that was an example where it's like, I like Ted Cruz a lot better than Tucker Carlson right now, but also like, man, Ted Cruz could be a little bit better with I wish he wasn't a dispensationalist kind of thing.
Yeah. And so, that's the balance I'm trying to strike, and being, we're a much smaller platform, if anything. So it's trying to figure out how do you best navigate, where I agree dispensationalism is pervasive. And I do think it's bad biblical hermeneutics.
Yeah. Sure.
And how do you harshly address it? I don't even know if harsh is the right word, but how do you rightly address it with the gravity of the implications of that worldview, which I think are massive? I mean, the potential vast majority of American governance is controlled by Christians who have, at least are influenced by dispensationalist thought, I would say. And that's for some is massively impacting their relationship to the state of Israel. So how do you, from a biblical perspective, criticize them without, again, providing cover for those who are using it to hate ethnic Jews, or who want to destroy Israel because they hate ethnic Jews again, or they don't think there's any rationale for defending Israel when there's, political, socioeconomic reasons that you would defend Israel? So how do you best go about that? Being make sure your gun's pointing in the right direction, or maybe you just have to dual wield. That's what I feel like. You have to dual wield in these situations.
No, I really don't care what people think. And if I have a target, I'm going to aim at the target. And then if some stupid person wants to run out in front of me while I'm shooting, they can do that. But if like some stupid neo-Nazi thinks like, ooh, I agree with Cody, like next week, I'm going to say something that he disagrees with. So I think one common tactic that a lot of people like, I think an example of a person who's done this really well is, poorly, I guess, is John Harris, who has associated with a lot of these people. But I think he is on the fence maybe about some of these things, or he leans kind of maybe in the woke right direction. But I think ultimately he is treating this movement very differently than he treated the woke movement. And a lot of people like him, where he's all of a sudden, he's not willing to name names anymore. And he's not willing to criticize people like Joel Webbon, even though he went to the Trash World conference last year with a bunch of other people, because because he happens to have a lot of followers from that group, and you can't alienate yourself from your followers. So the solution is you don't want to be spineless like that. You want to have a backbone. And that means you can't care what people think. If there is something that needs to be criticized, and you happen to have said stuff in such a way to make you be followed by a bunch of clowns, like sorry, it's your biblical responsibility to speak the truth and to speak the actual truth to the audience in such a way where you're telling them what they need to hear. I had a conversation with, a lot of people are on, love him or hate him. There's the owner of the company Wasson Watch, and he recognized that he was posting a lot of content that was making him really popular with the neo-Nazi crowd. And eventually he realized, like, whoa, I'm getting a lot of attention from these guys, but also I don't actually like these people and I disagree with them. And so I feel like I have to say something to kind of cull my numbers a little bit. And so I think that's our responsibility when we go into situations like that. He lost a lot of sales, a lot of business, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. He lost thousands of followers over the course of like just a week. And I think those are the kinds of things we have to be okay with, because those were the kinds of things that Jesus was okay with. He said things like, Jesus would speak and his disciples would come to him, and because people were grumbling and they would say, whoa, teacher, these are hard words. Like, you shouldn't say that around these people. And then Jesus, what did he do? He said it even harder. And then those people went away. and Jesus wasn't like, oh, dang, I was wrong. I should have been more seeker sensitive. Like, that was good for Jesus to say that, obviously, because he's the Son of God. And so we cannot care about what people think. So if I see dispensationalism as a threat, and it is, I'm going to talk about it. Because this Israel stuff happened in current events. That's what sparked me to talk about dispensationalism again, because it's relevant. But and the dispensationalists often have called me like, "Oh, you're a neo-Nazi. If you don't like dispensationalism, you're a neo-Nazi." So I was being called a neo-Nazi, and then the actual neo-Nazis, what are they calling me? They're calling me a Zionist and a leftist. So if you're getting like opposite criticisms from both sides, you're probably in a pretty good spot. But yeah, I think that's the kind of approach where we should have towards these things. We should tell people what they need to hear, and we should not care about who that turns away if we happen to be followed by bad people.
He's been mentioned multiple times, and I've engaged with his stuff. Well, I've seen a couple of his stuff, but haven't spent much time with him. But I think he's an interesting figure to show where churches and church leaders can go wrong. So Joel Webbon, right? He's made the rounds. He was almost trying to tap into more mainstream conservative circles. I know he did an interview back in the day with Ali Stuckey. I think that's the route he was trying to go. And now he's in this weird spot where, like you said, he's associating with these figures who are open, avowed neo-Nazis, I would say. Like, I think he's
like now
he's not there. He's pretty close,
which is one of the worst ones.
Yeah. So how does someone like Joel Webbon get there, and what is the lessons learned from someone who is, he's a big figure in his own way? What are the lessons that we learned from him, who's rightfully, I mean, in many ways theologically we would have agreements where he's criticizing dispensationalism, is broadly, reformed-ish, evangelical. What is the lesson learned with someone like Joel Webbon?
Yeah, so on paper, here's one thing I really don't like. On paper, Joel Webbon and we have very similar theology. We're both post-mill. We are both, well, I don't think he's theonomic, but I'm theonomic. We're reformed. We both want a Christian nation, even though our perceptions of that are very different. And by the way, that reminded me of something else. I think another tactic that I use whenever I approach the woke right people is I actually find that we agree, at least on the surface, until you dive into what they really believe. On the surface, we agree on almost everything, because they're like, oh, you must hate the Bible because you don't want a Christian nation, because you don't like Christian nationalism. And it's like, I've been called a Christian nationalist more times than I can count. I'm not afraid of the label Christian nationalism. I really do want a Christian nation. And so often they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And that kind of shuts them down often. And so it's like, I actually agree with you on the surface, on so many of these things. But it's the application of those ideas that I think we differ. And I think the more you get into the application of those ideas, it's more and more obvious that many of these people are very, very lost. And so with Joe Webbon, I think it's more obvious now than ever that he's I don't know if I would call him a false teacher, because he teaches the gospel, but he is a fake pastor. He is obviously disqualified from pastoral ministry. And I think he never has been qualified for pastoral ministry. There was a document that was released just like earlier this year, I think, about a situation very early in his ministry where he slept with a church member, and then he refused to step down at that point. And then years later, like they found out, and his church elders like confronted him with this sin, and they told him to take a break from ministry. And then he said he did, while actually he was trying to plant a church in Texas. And so, I mean, there were like all this big, long, massive list of like disqualifying things. His elders, his like legal ecclesiastical authority, said this guy's disqualified from ministry, and these people don't care. So it's like, oh, we don't care. I'm just going to go start an independent Baptist church or independent whatever. I'm going to start a Presbyterian church without a presbytery, like Ogden does, and they're in the same crowd. And so, when you look at their character and when you look at their past, it's like you realize these people aren't actually qualified for pastoral ministry. And what kind of person would want to bring that judgment onto themselves of being a pastor if they were so blatantly disqualified from pastoral ministry, and every mentor figure that they've had for their entire ministry has told them that they're disqualified? So I think the kind of person that takes is, one, somebody who doesn't actually care about the word of God, which disqualifies them from pastoral ministry. And then two, who cares more about something like attention or money or building a following than actually shepherding the flock. And on top of that, you can add the fact that he's falling for the woke right stuff, and he's partnering with Nick Fuentes, who is a professed neo-Nazi, and he's gay. And I mean, it's crazy. So it's like, it gets more and more outrageous every day. And I've been calling out Joe Webbon as a fake pastor and disqualified and just a really bad guy that nobody should be taking seriously for years now. But another thing is, I used to actually like him. Like I wasn't always biased against Joe Webbon. I listen to his podcast often. People often are like, you've probably never even listened to his podcast. It's like, you have no idea, dude. I listen to him a lot. I appreciated him. I have a photo with him where I met him at a conference one time, and I was fooled. I didn't know much about him. I just listened to his podcast. But the more I learned, especially as I saw him starting to go this direction, that told me I'm not even sure if he's full in on the things that he says he believes, because he changes his mind about things so much. But what that ultimately tells me is not necessarily that Joel's a neo-Nazi or whatever, but he just wants attention. He wants to build a following, and that's not the kind of behavior that a pastor ought to have. And I think that is they're either malicious, or they're greedy, or they're just stupid. And I think in the case of somebody who is in a leadership position, the stupidity kind of is hard to justify. It's like, it's easy to be a stupid person who's a follower of these guys, but it's really hard to, for years, build up some kind of platform and lead people to such an extent as a lot of these people who are leaders in the Christian woke right movement, and then not be malicious.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard this term, but I think they all fall into they're prosperity preachers of a different kind, because we're no longer in this, their dollars. They might not be chasing dollars, even though it results from it. But like you said, they're chasing attention. We're in the attention economy. Social media is completely opened up. I think when Elon Musk bought Twitter, it opened up Twitter in a way that has changed the game for a lot of these woke right pastors, that they can build a huge audience. They can go on Tucker Carlson now and espouse their ideas in many ways. So the attention economy, these prosperity preachers that are prosperous through the eyeballs that they're getting, and even it motivates them to not just build their own following, but to also be worse, because then they get people to respond to it as well. So it's a confounding problem. So, man, Joel Webbon is an interesting. Is there have you found in your time digging in and refuting these types of people and engaging with them, Have you seen any figures that have gone that route and come back and are now saying, "Hey, this is crazy"? I can't
That's
think of a
interesting.
major figure yet.
I've seen, yeah, I can't think of any like leader type people, I don't think, because, well, which is kind of indicative of the fact that the vast majority of people in leadership positions who call themselves pastors are not pastors; they're disqualified, and this is
Mhm.
just a problem we have in America. Like, I think the vast majority of pastors are probably disqualified from pastoral ministry.
Mm.
But that, that doesn't mean that just like the most of the pastors in your circle or most of the pastors that you appreciate are fake pastors. Like, I think I found a good number of solid pastors to follow. And that's something that that's important for us to find. Like, we should find actually good, trustworthy people. Because one reason I know that people follow Joel Webbon, and it's how I followed Joel Webbon originally, was because he had or well, at least eventually, I later learned that he didn't really, but he was a conservative voice that was speaking out against the left around 2020. And he, I thought, had a good response to COVID. Now, he was criticizing it later. What actually happened was he locked down his church and they met outside and they all wore masks just like everybody else. So, so it's like, oh,
Wow.
it's just more evidence that it's like, oh,
Yeah.
you actually have no idea what you're talking about. And, like good, the right response, ironically, because that's his fake ministry's name, that churches should have had was, a lot of churches were legitimately confused, and they were like, oh, maybe this disease is real, or maybe it's, super actually dangerous. Let's wear masks, before they knew that masks weren't effective, whatever. And then, after a week or two, they were like, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. Like, that was good. But if you did it for months and then you never publicly repented for it, and that's
Yeah.
that's a weird one for me. And that's not to say that
Mm.
people like that can never become trustworthy, because repentance is a thing and forgiveness really is a thing, and people really can make mistakes. But I'm just saying, with people like him, that's actually a pattern of behavior. You're just going along with the crowd and what the crowd does. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen a lot more of people who are followers of these people who change their minds. And especially as these people get crazier and crazier, where it's like, or if I'm just allowed to have a reasonable conversation with these people where we can actually talk back and forth and they're actually willing to listen, um, often their minds can be changed. If somebody is actually interested in truth, rarely are they interested in truth. But if you find the rare person who is interested in truth from those crowds, they will be convinced, because the evidence is so insurmountable against these people.
Mhm. Do you think that these ideas and these people, these leaders that we've mentioned, do they have a shelf life? Are they coming to the end, or are they picking up steam?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think my prediction with Joel Webbon, for example, is I don't think he's going to be around much longer, at least as a pastor. He seems to be going the public figure route. Um,
Yeah.
he has these regular meltdowns from the pulpits. People share his sermons where he's like, like the Room movie clip where it's like, everybody betrays me. I'm fed up with this world. It seems like that's what Joel Webbon is doing from the
Do you know how
pulpit. And
many people go to his church? Like, how many
it's
people is he
it's
preaching to?
relatively small. They meet in like a barbecue restaurant basement or something. So it can't be too many. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he has a couple hundred at least. I don't know.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
he has, he has over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So plenty of people
Right.
follow the guy, even if not a lot of people go to his church locally. But yeah, I think ultimately God made the world. I'm post-millennial. I'm optimistic about the future. God made the world where stupidity has a shelf life. Stupidity is short-lived. Evil will not last forever. Even the woke left ideology didn't last forever. Eventually, the pendulum is going to swing another way. And I think the more times
Mhm.
the pendulum swings back and forth, more reasonable people are made. So I am better equipped to deal with the woke right stuff because I really understood the woke left stuff well. And what also I think that tells us is, if somebody understood the woke left stuff well, but somebody like Joel Webbon, it's like, oh, he was saying all the right stuff about the left and about the tyranny of the government during COVID and all that. But if he
Yeah.
misunderstands the woke right stuff, which he is, then that tells me he never even understood the woke left stuff in the first place, because he's falling prey to exactly the same stuff that they were. because he's one of
Mm.
them. And so it's like, if somebody truly was well equipped against the woke left stuff, and they came out of that, like I did, was like, whoa, I realize this stuff is bad. I'm prepared for it when it happens again. And look, it happened again. And so now
Mhm,
I'm going to be
mhm.
even more prepared. And like, hopefully more people are going to come out of this and be like, okay, now I hate Marxism and I'm well equipped for the next thing. And the pendulum is just going to keep swinging back and forth. It's probably going to create like, all this hatred of women and minorities is just like BLM, hatred of white people created actual white supremacists. Calling everybody Nazis created actual Nazis. So all this stuff that
Right.
the woke right's doing, where they are calling everything feminism and they're calling everyone Zionist, like they're actually contributing, I think, to like a future mega dispensationalism or like future mega feminism. so
Mm,
it's
mm,
I think that's going to happen, but also more reasonable people are going to be created as the pendulum swings back and forth.
mm.
And the important thing is those of us who realize better now, we need to be prepared for that kind of thing. But yeah, ultimately, I think, especially in pastoral ministry, fake pastors really do not have a good time. Like the criticism eventually adds up. And even if they continue in their pastoral ministries, people eventually are going to stop taking them seriously. Like even like Joel Osteen, has a massive church, but
Yeah.
thankfully, broadly, the Christian community doesn't take Joel Osteen seriously anymore. And so I think the same thing is
Mm.
going to happen with these guys.
Yeah, I feel a similar name to Mark Driscoll. I don't know how you feel about him, but I know I've seen that with how
Yeah,
he
no, like
discredited
Mark
his
Driscoll,
entire ministry. Yeah.
yeah, I think he's in a similar boat where he has done some like outrageous things over the years, and he's also said some good things. And I know a lot of people. He
Mhm.
he kind of sparked the Young Restless and Reformed movement, and I
Yeah.
I came into Reformed theology after that was a fad. But so I was never really into Mark Driscoll, but like I can see why people like him. But also I think he's probably not qualified for pastoral ministry. He probably should stay out of the public sphere. Seems like somebody you shouldn't take seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. One last aspect as we kind of roll down that I want to hit, I would be remiss not to mention it, is the hate of women
Oh
that I
yeah,
see is pervasive among many Christian young men online.
yeah.
And I was wondering if you could speak wisdom and how do we address, without sounding like lame feminists and weak men, how do we address men just blatantly not caring about if women receive the gospel, and then also not caring about how they treat their wives, how they treat their mothers most of the time because they're speaking of ill of women. um how do you even address this issue, which and then also speak to, do you think that this is pervasive as well, like I'm hinting at?
Yeah, so I think that is this is actually a pretty deep issue that's really interesting to me. I've thought about this a lot because well, here's probably a good place to start. I had a friend who he he like had Asperger's. We don't talk anymore. But he kind of was kind of a funny guy. He ended up going to live off grid or something, like some mountain man. It's pretty funny. But
Yeah,
he
yeah.
because he was a little bit socially awkward, he never really had a girlfriend. And I think a response that vulnerable, and that made him angry and it made him insecure. And um, that can lead, just like the attacking white people thing, that can lead to you being beat down. And one response to that is to not give into the worldview. But another response is to totally embrace the worldview, except to flip it around and say, it's like, oh, it's not me that's the problem. It's actually the women. I can't find a girlfriend. I'm not happy. I can't, find a spouse or whatever because women suck.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and that actually is the direction that this poor guy started going down. He started following YouTube, well, I think some of them were Christian, but like I've never heard of these people, but they were talking about like they were trying to gaslight people into believing that everybody who disagreed with them is a like clinically diagnosable narcissist, and
Hmm.
women are broadly evil, Yeah, it's kind of like the Andrew Tate thing where it's like,
Yeah, the red pill community. Yeah.
yeah, where it's like you shouldn't marry them because marriage is this oppressive thing. You should just take advantage of them. Because like
Mm,
that's what, women are made for. They're just made to be taken advantage of. And that same kind of ideology I sort of see, well, really more than sort of, coming from this group as well, like you pointed out. And it's really weird because a lot of these people, they claim to be Christians, but also they blame women for all their problems. You see
yeah.
certain accounts just constantly talking about how evil feminism is, and it's like you have a lot of young men who are vulnerable and they're angry and they are, they don't have girlfriends and they might never have had girlfriends, and you're also telling them to get married early. You're telling them to get married as early as possible, which I don't think is a bad idea. Again, like I agree with so many things that these guys say,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
so like I think it's good to get married early. If uh, I mean, it could also be bad to get married early. Let me say that.
Right.
So
Right.
it is not necessarily a bad thing to get married early. Um, but this kind of thing where it's like you're giving these young men a worldview where they believe, where they're not necessarily suitable themselves to be a spouse, and they're
Mm,
expecting to go get one. And then when they don't, or when it doesn't turn out well, you're also teaching them that feminism is responsible for all the world's problems. And so they say, instead of saying like, this is what Marxism does, instead of looking at yourself and caring about personal responsibility and improving yourself, you say it's other people's fault. And so it's the feminists' fault. It must be feminism. Every girl who won't date me is a feminist, and
mm,
feminism is evil, and yada yada. And so even when a lot of men get married, they might go into marriage, these young men, um, with this worldview where women should wear head coverings all the time, and they should not have an income. Like, yeah, even Joel Webbon numerous times have said like women shouldn't be in the public sphere.
yeah.
and,
Yeah. I don't
and
want
it's
to see
like,
women at all.
yeah. And then ironically, it's like these people are totally missing. Now, uh, again, I hate feminism. So I'm not a feminist. I
Right.
hate feminism. I think feminism is totally evil. But at the same time, uh, people who say like women can't have jobs, they should be homemakers for their whole lives, have as many kids as possible. Like, kids are good. Kids are a blessing. I think you should have as many kids as you can. But also like this whole thing where it's like women should stay home. They can't ever have a job or a career. Even if you have a kid, or a kid's on the way. Like I know couples who, um, it's like the woman felt this responsibility just because of their weird theology, that they had to stay home while, and maybe she wasn't even pregnant yet, and while the husband
Mm,
goes and works, and like she doesn't know what to do. And so it's like
mm,
she finds herself doing laundry every single day. It's like, you don't need to do laundry every day. Or
mm.
finding to like give herself meaning with meaningless projects like, well, I'm going to crochet 20 things a day. It's like, what are you doing? You could
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with hobbies. There's nothing wrong with crocheting. There's nothing wrong with doing the laundry. But it's like, if you're filling your time with meaningless stuff in order to give yourself meaning because you think the Bible tells you that it's wrong to go out and have a job, like, that's outrageous. That's stupid. And your husband is stupid for letting you believe that, because the
Mm,
Proverbs 31 woman owned a business. She had employees. Like, she went to the, like, we get this picture of the husband going out and having a job and just working, making money all day. But she was out running the business and having employees and telling people what to do and shopping in the marketplace and taking care of kids at home. And so it's like there is this so much more full picture of the freedom of what women are allowed to do than what this movement allows. And I think that's wicked and it's evil. And there are weird correlations between this woke right movement and Islam. And I've talked about that on my podcast before too, where it's like
mm,
Islam wants women to cover themselves up. They overemphasize modest. It's not even modesty. They call it modesty, but it's fake modesty, because putting a blanket over yourself isn't modest. And they they want women to stay home, and it's all this like crazy oppressive stuff on women, and it's like that's what these people are doing, and it's going to lead to very unhappy marriages. It's going to lead to divorce, and it's going to lead to like your even Corey Mahler's co-host. He is divorced. Woe is the guy's name. He's divorced, and his wife is a flaming liberal. And like, that's the kind of thing that this evil ideology creates. You're actually like this calling everybody a Zionist is actually creating hardcore dispensationalists in the future. So this like actual hatred of women is just creating hardcore feminism in the future, and it's going to be their fault.
Yeah. And it's almost like we're in a society and a culture that is so ideologically possessed.
Yeah.
Like it's all about ideologies that we forget to love the people that are right in front of us. Like I can't imagine. I would never say to my wife, even if she said something wrong, oh, that's just because you're being like a feminist. I would just never say that is the ideological possession that some of these young men have, that they think anything that they're saying, if it's right or wrong, is because of these ideological camps that everyone's in. And most of that comes from these online communities and being so enamored with it that you can't see reality. You can't see people that actually, will say things, be right or wrong and different things, but you just talk about it. It doesn't mean you have to separate into different camps. Like, imagine being divorced and you're in Corey Mahler's podcast and your wife's a mega liberal. That's like the danger that you run into. So I totally agree. And I'm passionate about it too, is because I'm just saddened by it. Because I'm like, guys, like, get out there. There's actual good church going women that you can meet. I know that there's a lot of doomerism out there for young men. And the dating culture does have problems. I'm not going to say that it doesn't.
Yes,
the dating culture is in many ways wicked, but that doesn't mean that women themselves are wicked. And there's a lot of wicked things that men contribute to the dating culture, especially as well. Andrew Tate being a great example of a figurehead of that. But
and if we're not allowed to marry any kind of woman with like any kind of like if you can even sniff wokeness in a woman, you can't marry her. Well, it's like none of these guys should be married either because they're woke, right?
Right.
So it's
right.
like we need to work on ourselves first, I guess is what I'm saying. We need to realize that we need to be the kind of husband that the wife we want would want. And that, I think, is what they're missing in life, in so many things. It's like, you need to become a better person and not put off all of your problems on other people. You need to realize that you're responsible for your own actions. And, even if you're single, you shouldn't let that make you angry. Even if we really are experiencing being beat down politically or socially or whatever, because we're white or because we're straight, like, that's actually true. That is happening, but that shouldn't make us angry, because the biblical response to these things is to have joy. We should be joyful in our singleness while pursuing relationships. And we should also be joyful in persecution. And the response that we should have, the biblical response, is entirely different than the kind of response that these people are pushing, which is anger and fear and control.
Well, Cody, I want to thank you for coming on and having this discussion. I think at a later date, we'd love to have you back on with my brother on as well. Maybe
Anytime.
We'll talk about something similar, but really appreciate it. I think I've learned a lot, and there's more to think about in this area. I mean, I feel like it's such a pervasive movement, and I want to know how to navigate online as my brother Seth and I, hopefully grow on the platform, but also how do we engage on platforms like X, and this has been helpful. So I want to thank you for coming on, and thank everyone for watching. Subscribe to Cody. Go over to his links in the description and give him a sub. It is Spare No Arrows podcast. And then subscribe to the Obro Show. I'm typically joined by my brother Seth. Right now, again, just myself. So I think doing this podcast by myself earns at least one more subscription out of you if you have not already. So I'm just going to put that out there.
You did great.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to end the stream and then go about our business.